I inherited $120 million at 22, then Mom tried to steal it. Until Grandpa exposed her. When I turned 22, my grandpa gave me something that completely blindsided me, his company, worth $120 million. But the celebration barely had time to settle before my mom pulled a stunt that knocked the wind out of me. Right after the party, she insisted that her new husband should take over the business. I told her no. She didn't like that one bit, so she kicked me out of the house. Then Grandpa, calm as ever, let out this chuckle and dropped a truth bomb that stunned everyone in the room. But before I dive into all that, let me say this, I've noticed the channel's been slowing down a bit lately. If you're here and you like these stories, hitting that subscribe button is the easiest way to show support. It's fast, it's free, and it really helps keep this community growing strong. You gotta hear the story. I'm 22 now, but honestly, it feels like I've already lived 3 separate lives. First, I was the forgotten daughter of a man no one really talks about anymore. Then I became the inconvenient baggage of a mother who only cared about climbing the social ladder. And now somehow I've ended up the accidental owner of a massive business empire worth more than most people see in 100 lifetimes. Thing is, none of this was ever meant for me. And I don't say that to sound humble. I mean, my mother made it her mission in life to remind me that I was nothing more than a footnote in her journey. Just a kid she had to deal with before she could finally go live the glamorous life she always thought she deserved. I'm Rachel, by the way. And my childhood felt like it had a fault line running through it before Dad died, and after. He was gone in a car crash when I was only 7. And my mom, Monica, didn't even pretend to grieve. She moved on so fast, it was like she'd been waiting for an excuse. Within a year, she'd married Greg, a guy who walked around with a Bluetooth in one ear, wore his sunglasses indoors, and said things like, "I don't work for people. I partner with investors." But in reality, Greg was just a flashy con artist, fancy cologne, lots of slick talk, and a track record full of business failures. The only adult who ever made me feel like I mattered was my dad's father, Grandpa Carter. To everyone else, he was this quiet, sharp-edged businessman who'd built an auto repair empire from one rundown garage back in the 70s. But to me, he was the one person who actually talked to me like I had a mind of my own. By the time I was 12, he was already teaching me how to read financial reports. At 16, I was sitting beside him in board meetings, not because he was grooming me to take over, but because he believed knowledge wasn't gendered. He wanted me to see that a legacy didn't have to skip me just because someone else said it should. Even with all that, I never once thought I'd inherit the business. I figured he'd either pass it off to one of his top execs or sell it when the time came. I never asked. I was too busy trying to get through college while living in a house where I was barely tolerated. So when Grandpa invited everyone to his mansion for my 22nd birthday, I didn't think much of it. I figured it'd be the usual, some stiff small talk, a couple of polite gifts, maybe even a decent photo with him if I was lucky. That is, before Greg made one of his creepy comments and ruined the vibe like he always did. But this time was different. I didn't expect the massive crowd, or the catering that looked like it came straight from a celebrity wedding. And I definitely didn't expect Grandpa to pause halfway through dessert, clear his throat, and drop a life-altering surprise. He stood up and told everyone he was stepping down as CEO, and then, just like that, he said he was handing 51% of the company directly to me. Not in a trust. Not as some temporary title. Full ownership. Effective immediately. I couldn't speak. My whole body was trembling. The entire room went dead silent, except Greg, who literally dropped his fork. And my mom? She was gripping her wine glass, so tight it cracked in her hand. I couldn't wrap my head around it until Grandpa turned to me, looked me square in the eye, and said, "It's yours now. You earned it. Happy birthday." Now, I wish I could say that was the exact moment everything changed, but it wasn't. Not quite. That moment hit 20 minutes later, when my mom yanked me out into the hallway like I was a misbehaving kid at church. The smile she'd been wearing earlier was gone. In its place was that cold, calculating stare I knew all too well. She didn't ask how I was doing. Didn't say congrats. Nope, she got straight to business. Told me her husband would be stepping in as acting CEO. Said it like it was already a done deal, like my opinion didn't even count. In her mind, this empire, built by my grandfather and given to me, wasn't mine at all. Not really. I was still, to her, just a clueless girl pretending to play in a man's world. I didn't sugarcoat my response. I said no flat out. No apologies, no softening the blow. I told her she must have lost her damn mind if she thought I'd hand over $100 million company to a man who couldn't keep a single one of his own ventures alive for more than 6 months. And what did she say to that? Then pack your bags and get out of Grandpa's house. Just like that. She didn't blink. According to her, Greg had already started the paperwork to take over the mansion, and I was no longer welcome there. You'd think I would have panicked, gotten scared, maybe even confused. But honestly, all I felt was heat rising in my chest, this fire I'd never felt before. It wasn't fear. It was something like clarity. In that moment, I didn't see her as my mom. I saw her for what she really was, a woman who'd spent her whole life clawing and scheming for power, and now she couldn't stand the idea of watching it land in someone else's hands, especially not her own daughter's. Before I could get a word out, I heard footsteps coming down the hallway. Grandpa had been standing there, listening to the whole thing. He didn't look angry. If anything, he looked calm, maybe even entertained. Then he turned to her and said she was wrong. The house she was trying to kick me out of? He had already transferred the deed to me the week before. No fanfare, no announcement, just a quiet, airtight legal move. Signed, sealed, and impossible to undo. I watched the color drain from her face. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. She just stood there, stunned. And just when I thought things couldn't get any more surreal, Grandpa delivered the knockout punch. He looked her and Greg both dead in the eye and told them they were done. Not just from the house. From everything. The company, the family, the legacy, every piece of it. They were out. Then he turned to me and said with a smirk, "Might want to get the locks changed tomorrow." They left without saying another word. Greg's face was beet red, and Mom had that frantic, calculating look she always got when things weren't going her way. Like she was already doing the math, trying to figure out how to spin it all back in her favor. But for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink under her gaze. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel small. I felt free. That night, I stood alone in what used to be the guest room, now my room, and looked at myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Around 1 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a message from her. Said she'd overreacted and wanted to talk in the morning, but I didn't respond. Because by then, I already knew something she didn't. Grandpa had one last surprise up his sleeve. One that would make handing me the company seem like just the warm-up act. And by the time she found out, it'd be way too late for her to fix what she'd broken. That whole night felt like some kind of fever dream. Just hours before, I was the invisible girl living in the margins of my mother's life. And now, I was the owner of the company she thought she'd one day rule, and the mansion she assumed would be hers. But even then, I could tell her text, I overreacted. Let's talk. Wasn't some heartfelt apology. It was strategy. She thought she still had time to wriggle her way back in, to butter up Grandpa or manipulate me into slowly handing things over to Greg. Bit by bit. What she didn't know was that Grandpa had been planning this move longer than anyone suspected. The next morning, I came downstairs to find him already dressed, sitting at the breakfast table with his usual black coffee and a thick stack of old-school newspapers. He looked like he hadn't just dismantled my mother's dreams 12 hours earlier. Totally unfazed. I made some tea and sat across from him. There was this quiet weight in the room, not sadness, not tension exactly, more like anticipation. After a few sips, he slid a heavy envelope across the table toward me. I stared at it, unsure if I was ready to open it. "Didn't want to ruin your birthday last night," he said, casual as ever. "But I think you're ready." Inside was a stack of documents, legal files, financial reports, all meticulously organized. And right there, in black and white, was the kicker, a formal statement declaring that my mother had absolutely no claim to anything tied to the family, no access to the estate, no rights to the business, no stake in any personal trusts. What really floored me was finding out she'd been cut out of everything nearly 5 years ago. Not just out of the current plans, but out of every single will, contingency clause, and backup succession Grandpa had ever drafted. Then he told me something I hadn't known until that moment. Years back, Greg had gone behind my mom's back and approached Grandpa with some big pitch. He wanted Grandpa to start selling off parts of the company, liquidating deadweight, as he put it, and making the business more modern. Basically, cashing out. He also hinted that if Grandpa ever passed away, he and my mom had every intention of flipping the whole company for a quick payday. They had no interest in carrying on the legacy. No desire to actually run the thing. Just dollar signs in their eyes. Grandpa let them talk. Let them think they were getting somewhere. But the whole time, he was busy moving the pieces, transferring assets, reworking the trusts, and putting everything under my name. Quietly, carefully, strategically. While I thought I was just tagging along those 3 summers, shadowing him for fun, he was actually grooming me to take the wheel. I had no idea. I thought he was just humoring me. Turns out, he'd been preparing me the whole time. But what really shattered me, what honestly broke my heart, was what Grandpa told me next. The reason he put everything into motion that weekend? It wasn't just about teaching my mother a lesson. It was because he'd just been diagnosed with terminal cancer. The doctors gave him 3 months, maybe 6 if we were lucky. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. I hadn't even had time to wrap my head around what he'd given me, let alone enjoy it. And now I knew it all came with a countdown. I started to fall apart right there, but he stopped me, told me not to waste time crying. He didn't want tears. He didn't want pity. What he wanted was revenge, not for himself exactly, but for everything my mother had tried to strip away. For the way she abandoned my father. For how she treated me like I was just an inconvenience she had to drag through life. He smiled at me, the way only he could, and said, "You're the knife I've been sharpening for 20 years, Rachel. Now go use it." So I did. That same day, I called for an emergency board meeting at company headquarters. As the majority owner, I had the power to make executive changes, and I used every ounce of it. I fired the 2 senior executives who had cozied up to Greg during Grandpa's last few months in charge. They thought they had secured their spots under the new regime, but I made sure that fantasy vanished real quick. In their place, I promoted 2 longtime VPs, men who'd been by Grandpa's side since the early days. They weren't flashy, but they were solid. Loyal. They understood what this company stood for. Then I had our legal team draft and send a cease and desist to Greg. Apparently, he'd already started calling regional managers, introducing himself as the incoming executive director. He even had the nerve to create an official email signature. By nightfall, I made sure every trace of him was scrubbed clean from our systems. Of course, Mom went ballistic. 2 days later, she showed up at the mansion, with Greg, of course, both of them strutting up the driveway like they still owned the place. Matching smug grins like they were walking into a boardroom they thought they still controlled. I didn't let them inside. I met them outside on the steps. She said she wanted to talk things through rationally, but the moment I brought up the revised inheritance documents, her mask cracked. She accused me of turning Grandpa against her. Called me ungrateful. Tried pulling the guilt card, reminding me she raised me alone after Dad died. Like she hadn't spent my whole life pushing me aside. Like she hadn't treated me like baggage she was ashamed to carry. And then came the part that almost made me laugh. She actually begged. Not in some heartfelt, emotional way. It was awkward, rushed, desperate. But it was still begging. She asked if I'd consider giving Greg an advisory role. Just something small, she said, so he could help guide the company. We're family, she said. This company should stay in the family. That was the moment I realized she still didn't get it. So I looked her straight in the eye and said, it is staying in the family. Mine. Not yours. Not Greg's. And definitely not in the hands of people who tried to bully, manipulate, and erase me. She blinked, like she hadn't expected that. Then she asked what she was supposed to do now. I didn't hesitate. I told her, find a real job, like the rest of us. And this time, she actually left. For good. In the weeks that followed, Grandpa moved into the mansion with me. Every morning we'd sit down together for breakfast. Every evening, we'd go over the company's reports. We'd laugh, argue over branding ideas, brainstorm marketing campaigns. But it wasn't about money anymore. It was about legacy. That was the word he kept using, legacy. He told me stories I'd never heard before about the first guys he hired, the old van he used to haul parts, the time in the 80s when he nearly lost everything and had to start from scratch. I soaked it all up. Every word. Every lesson. 3 months later, he passed in his sleep. I was there with him. I held his hand in those final moments and thanked him, not just for the company or the house or the money, but for believing in me when no one else ever did. His funeral was small and private. My mother wasn't invited. She tried to show up anyway. Security stopped her at the gates. I never saw her again. It's been a year now. The company's not just stable, it's thriving. I expanded into electric vehicle services, overhauled our customer experience, and funneled millions into community repair initiatives. We're not just growing, we're giving back. I still live in the mansion, but I've converted half of it into a development center, specifically for women in trades. Mechanics, engineers, technicians. The kind of women my mother would have looked down on. The kind of women my grandfather would have hired on the spot. As for my mom and Greg, last I heard, things fell apart fast. He bailed. She's been bouncing between temp jobs and living in some condo someone else is paying for. I don't know who. I don't care enough to find out. She once told me I was too soft, that I didn't have what it took to survive in the real world. But she was wrong. I'm not soft. I'm steel. Grandpa made sure of that. I'm steel now. Not the kind you're born with, but the kind that takes years to shape. Heat, pressure, time, and a whole lot of fire. Funny thing is, she never even noticed the flames she helped ignite. She had no idea that every time she pushed me aside, every time she made me feel small, she was stoking something inside me. Now here I am, running a $100 million company she'll never get close to, and she's out there somewhere, watching it all from the outside. Right where she put me.